Put yourself on 16 meters of open deck, mid-Atlantic. Around you, a pregnant woman, 2 children, 8 men working the ship, 4 cows and 6 sheep roped down amidships, 3 weeks from land, and no toilet aboard. Nothing built to hold waste at all. Every one of you arrives alive. 600 years later, the Mayflower crosses shorter water in a bigger ship. Of the 18 wives aboard, 5 are alive by spring. And here is the strange part. That deck was the easy half of the Viking year. The hard half starts in October, when the ship comes ashore. 20 people and their livestock sealed under one roof, and the ground outside frozen too hard for a spade until April. How do you live through that every winter for 3 centuries without poisoning yourself? They had answers, and one is still working right now in a field in Greenland, 1,000 years after the last farmer walked away. Stay on that deck a moment longer, because the numbers deserve it. 5 meters across at the widest point. No cabin, no hold to sleep in, no privacy of any kind. The animals cannot be walked, and they outweigh every person aboard. Whatever they produce, and whatever you produce, shares the planking with your food, your bedding, and your children. Hold that picture, and now sail it home. October, somewhere inland in Norway. The ship is dragged ashore for the winter, and the household closes in on itself. Home is one long building, holding 20 people. The cattle, sheep, and horses come in behind a wooden partition at the low end, and they will not leave it until the grass returns. Outside, the ground begins to shut. By December, it is frozen hard enough to turn a spade, and it stays that way for months. You cannot dig a new pit. Deepening the old one is out. In a whiteout, you would struggle to find it at all. For 5 months of the year, that household has no working toilet of any kind. Anyone who has worked outdoors in serious cold knows what happens to soil at that point. It stops being soil. It turns into something closer to rock, and no tool you own will argue with it. And this was not one hard winter somebody wrote down. It was every winter on every farm for 3 centuries. Iceland was settled in the year 874 and has been farmed without a break ever since. Get this wrong, and you do not get a bad smell. You get fouled water inside a sealed building, in the season when a sick child cannot be moved, and no help is within a day's walk. Now, the Vikings were not a dirty people. We covered that in our video on Norse hygiene, the weekly baths, the combs in every grave, Ibn Fadlan watching them wash. This is a different question, and a harder one. Not how clean they were, where it all went. Start on the water with a correction, because almost everyone pictures the wrong ship. The vessel that crossed to Iceland and Greenland was not the long, narrow raider with 60 men at the oars. Raiders hugged coastlines. A longship draws barely a meter of water. A raiding crew simply ran it up a beach at dusk and did everything ashore. More than 200 usable harbor points line the old sea routes. For them, this problem barely existed. The ocean ships had no such luxury. The Nar was broad, deep, and heavy, built for cargo, and written sources are clear it was the only ship type making the Greenland run. We have one. Skuldelev 1, raised from Roskilde Fjord, built in western Norway around 1030. 16 meters long, 90 square meters of sail, close to 20 tons of capacity. And look at the manifest, because it is not a war party. 6 to 8 crew, plus a family, plus their livestock, alive on deck for weeks. So ask the question straight. Days from any shore with no toilet, no hold, and no privacy. How does a family cross an ocean without disease tearing through it? Part of the answer is procedure, and it is refreshingly unromantic. In a calm sea, the leeward rail, downwind, the ship's motion doing half the work. In weather, a bucket, emptied over the side, rinsed on a rope, stowed. For the women, sagas and later accounts describe a cloth screen rigged at anchor. Nothing about it was elegant. All of it worked, and everybody aboard had done it since childhood. But procedure alone does not explain the health record, and this is the part I find genuinely clever. The hull itself was working for them. Clinker construction means overlapping planks riveted along their edges, a shell that flexes with the sea instead of fighting it. A hull like that always ships a little water, over the rail and through the seams, which is why a bailer was standard kit on every Viking ship ever found. Deck and bilge were being rinsed and emptied around the clock, whether anyone intended it or not. Now put those two things together and look at what is missing. Dysentery, typhus, cholera. The killers of every packed ship for the next 1,000 years were diseases of the enclosed deck, of still air, standing bilge, and shared water going bad in the dark. An open deck in Atlantic wind, sluiced by spray and emptied by hand, gave them almost nothing to grow in. None of this was designed as hygiene. It came out of building light, fast and open, but the result stands. The crossing that should have been a plague ship simply was not, which leaves one real argument, and I will pick a side. No Viking ship find has ever produced a purpose-built waste vessel, not Oseberg, not Gokstad, not Skuldelev. I read that as refusal from a tradition that stripped every gram it did not need. Some of you will say, I am building philosophy out of an empty space. Fair enough. Tell me which of us is closer. Now the half of the year nobody talks about, and it opens with a claim that sounds wrong. Winter made this easier, not warmer, and not safer, easier in the one way that actually mattered, because a frozen midden does not rot. It does not smell, it does not leach into the water table, and it does not breed flies. 5 months of output from 20 people and a herd of animals simply locks solid and waits. So, the winter problem was storage, not sickness, which raises the obvious question. Where do you put 5 months of it, when a spade will not enter the ground? The building itself was the answer. A longhouse in the North Atlantic colonies had a byre built into one end, and that byre sat at the downhill end. Archaeological work on those byres shows stalls with drainage cut to carry liquid away from the living quarters. Gravity did the work permanently, for nothing. Now go inside before the light has properly arrived. Somebody is already awake, because one job on that farm does not wait for weather or mood. He pulls on wool, lifts the shovel off the wall, and walks the length of the building to the low end. The animals are already standing. They have been standing in it all night. That happens every single morning of the winter, not when someone gets round to it. Every morning, because the day it gets skipped is the day the problem starts moving up the building towards where the family sleeps. Human waste went into the same stream, out through the byre, onto the same growing heap. Anyone who has served in the field knows this rhythm without ever being taught it. You dig where the ground lets you, site it well away from your water, and get it done before you need it, because frozen ground does not negotiate at 3 in the morning. Which makes me want to ask you something. What was the job in your life that could not be skipped? The one nobody else was going to do, that got done whether you felt like it or not. Farm, ship, factory, sick room, it does not matter. That is what you and this man have in common, and I would like to hear it below. By March, the heap outside stands taller than a man. Nobody hides it. Nobody apologizes for it, because that frozen pile is comfortably the most valuable thing on the property. And what happens to it in April changes how you see this entire system. That is coming. First, though, we need to watch this whole arrangement fail, because when the Vikings moved into towns, it did. A farm with 20 people runs this system beautifully. Now try it with 10,000. 10th century Jorvik under modern York was one of the busiest trading towns in northern Europe. Narrow plots, wattle houses wall to wall, workshops in every yard. Norse Dublin looks identical in the ground, and underneath both, archaeologists keep finding the same object: pits, hundreds of them, lined with woven wattle behind the houses and sometimes right beneath the floorboards. Here, at last, is where the toilets were, proper ones. Some pits at Jorvik had fitted seats, wood in some cases, stone in others. In Denmark, a shaft 2 meters deep at Stevens has been radiocarbon dated to the Viking age, and may be the oldest toilet in the country. A family that builds a seat has made that spot permanent, and in a town, permanent matters. 1,000 households, 1,000 known points. They even solved the detail nobody thinks about. The waterlogged ground at York preserved what people used to clean themselves, moss mostly, scraps of wool. 1,000 years of shipbuilding genius, and the last component in the whole system was a handful of moss somebody had to go and gather. I like to think that job was handed out as a punishment. So the town had toilets, seats, even moss on supply. And it still could not win. Because a pit in a crowded town has a neighbor, and the neighbor is a well. Same wattle lining, same depth, same few meters of soil, year after year. Whatever seeped from one traveled towards the other, and the town slowly poisoned its own groundwater in slow motion. The proof came out of the ground in 1972, on pavement in York, during a dig ahead of a new bank branch. It produced the most famous piece of preserved Viking waste in the world, and inside it were hundreds of parasite eggs. Whipworm and mawworm, both carried by exactly this route, soil and water fouled by proximity. On the farm, the loop closed. In town, it leaked, and everybody drank a little of the leak. Now, before anyone calls that primitive, jump forward 1,000 years. Same island, same problem, bigger city. Victorian London poured its waste into the Thames until the river itself became the sewer. Cholera killed over 30,000 people in Britain across 1831 and 1832. In 1854, John Snow traced 600 deaths to a single water pump on Broad Street. One pump poisoned by a leaking cesspool a few feet away. Same mechanism as Jorvik, same distance. It took until the summer of 1858, when the river stank so badly, Parliament stopped work, before London built itself a real sanitation system. A Viking town and the capital of the industrial world, 1,000 years apart, failing in the identical way, pit beside well. The difference is that the Vikings never claimed to have solved it. They had somewhere better to be. And what waits there is the part of this story I most wanted to tell. If this is the kind of history you want more of, the like button is how YouTube learns that. So what were the farms doing with it? If the towns could not win, they were not disposing of it at all. They were harvesting it. Here is how we know, and it reads like detective work. At Gardar in Greenland, the old bishop's farm, researchers dug into the ditches beside the ruins and found something that had no business being in a field. Parasites, not soil creatures the other kind. lice and their relatives, species that live indoors, on people and on animals, and die anywhere else. There is exactly one way they end up scattered across a meadow. Everything from inside the houses and the byres, all of it, was carried out and spread on the ground deliberately as fertilizer. And the target tells you why. It was hay. Greenland's growing season is brutally short, and hay is the only thing that keeps cattle alive through winter. Gardar ran the largest cattle herd known in Norse Greenland. So the manure fed the hay fed the herd made next year's manure, and the loop closed on itself completely. Nothing left the farm. Nothing was wasted on it. That is why the heap in the yard was wealth. Not a problem to hide behind the barn. Next winter's food supply, standing in plain view, and every day of shoveling through the dark months was a deposit into it. Compare that to everywhere else. Medieval towns paid gong farmers to haul their cesspits away by night. Victorian London flushed a fortune in fertilizer into the sea and bought guano from Peru to replace it. The Vikings would have found both ideas genuinely deranged. Why would you pay to throw away the thing your fields eat? And the proof is still growing. Walk Icelandic farmland today, and the old ruins give themselves away every spring, because they green up first and fade last, sitting on a 1,000-year-old layer of household waste that is still feeding the grass. The farms are gone. The fertilizer has outlived the civilization that made it. One more turn of the knife. In 2022, researchers sequenced whipworm eggs from a Viking latrine, DNA intact, after 1,000 years, inside shells of tough chitin. The parasite rode this exact fertilizer loop, field to food, to gut and back. The system fed the fields, and it fed the worms, both at once, and for exactly the same reason. There is no free lunch in engineering. The Vikings simply picked the trade that kept the herd alive. Everything this video has described, the byre stream, the spring spreading, the heap in the yard, all of it is still physically there, frozen into the ground of Greenland, layer on layer. And 2 months ago, a laboratory finally read it. A Danish team went to the old settlement sites and sampled the rubbish itself. Norse heaps from the 10th to the 15th century, older ones from Paleo-Inuit hunters, newer ones from Danish settlers. Bone, shell, waste, and broken tools, layered and frozen where they fell. Then they sequenced what was living inside. 1,207 bacterial species came back, and a large share of them matched nothing science has ever described. Not from deep-sea vents, not from some sealed cave, from Viking rubbish heaps, full of life we have no name for. And the heaps are not anonymous. The dominant species are the ones that live on people and on livestock, which means each midden still carries the signature of the household that made it. 1,000 years on, you can read who lived there from what they threw away. Then the detail that gives the study its edge. The Arctic is warming 3 to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet, and those heaps are thawing. So the team asked the question you are asking now. Could something ancient wake up as the ground opens? Their answer, for now, is that the risk sits low. But sit with the difference for a second. Everything you have ever thrown away was collected, carted off, treated, and erased. That Norse farmer dropped his a short walk from the door, and it is still there, still layered, still alive. The Vikings kept nothing. The ground kept everything. Look at what those answers have in common. At sea, the open deck and the working hull. On the winter farm, the cold held it, and the spring spent it. In town, the pit and the seat, until the town outgrew them. On the fields, the crop consumed it. different mechanisms in every setting, and not one of them needed a specialist, a machine, or anybody outside the household. There was no single point of failure because there was no single system to fail. Sanitation was not something the Norse received. It was something they did in the same hour they fed the animals. Now go back to that deck. The pregnant woman, the 2 children, the animals, 3 weeks of ocean. She arrived, so did the families behind her, generation after generation, into countries nobody had farmed before. Then remember the other ship, 600 years later, better equipped, better provisioned, and half its passengers dead before the first spring. That gap has nothing to do with toughness. It comes down to a set of arrangements so ordinary that nobody who used them ever thought to write them down. I would not trade places, mind. Whipworm is not nostalgia. But there is a difference between a problem that has been solved and a problem that has been moved out of sight, and it is worth knowing which one you live with. Subscribe if you want the Viking Age told this way, as engineering rather than legend. It is the only way I know how to tell it. The Vikings are remembered for what they took. They deserve to be remembered for what they never wasted.